Welcome to Healthy and Wealthy Conversations, where we discuss everything that leads to health and wellness for your whole spirit, soul, mind, and body. Hello, and welcome to Healthy and Wealthy Conversations. I am your host, Casey Bell, and today's guest is Dinalynn Rosenbush. Let's get this show started. Thank you for joining me on Healthy and Wealthy Conversations. So your main reason for being here is you're going to teach us a healthier way to raise our children, and you call it play. Before we do that, were you raised in the way you're teaching, or did you raise your children this way, or did you figure this out along the way?
I think like all of us, I figured things out along the way. I don't think that I came to parenting knowing anything. I really didn't have any of the skills. When I went to college, I never had this idea that I would work with children. I thought I was going to work with brain injuries. And then I had my very first child in college, and then, to work with in my clinical settings. And then I thought, well, that was kind of fun. And then I ended up getting a teaching license because that was when I first came out of college. I thought that's going to be the easiest position as a new college grad. And I thought, well, this is kind of fun. And then before you knew it, I had children and I didn't even know how to change a diaper. I mean, like I didn't know anything. I know how to change a diaper on a toddler. I had done some of that, but I really hadn't even babysat babies, only young kids. And so I came to this knowing nothing. And then, but I think that I've had a natural tendency towards having some fun and having fun with, kids or whoever it is that I'm hanging out with. And I think that was instrumental to be able to learn. So yeah, so that's it. So, you say play, and I'm going to say the language of play is this conceptual idea that I use. And I think that we forget what play is a lot of the time. We think of play as Legos for our children, but it's more than that. It's a far more than that. And Casey, you play. Can you come up with what you play right off the top of your head?
Well, this podcast,
Exactly.
all
That's
my
one key.
podcasts, because I
Yeah,
remember a day when I said I would never do podcasts because I knew the work behind it and I didn't want to do it. And then the lockdown happened and I was like, hey, let's do this. And I didn't know what I was doing. I figured it out.
perfect. Your description. You don't know what you're doing, so you have to figure it out. So you are exploring, you're trying something new, you're experimenting, you're discovering, you're challenging yourself, you're getting into a zone that you don't know, and you're taking it in, and you're going to contribute and discover. Not necessarily contribute to the world. I mean, you did eventually, but initially you're contributing to your knowledge base. It's that exploration state. So we as adults have that part of us that really needs to be fed. And when we don't get into that part of us, we also get kind of stagnant and we feel sad, and we need to get into our play zone. Now for you, your first example was this podcast. And I know that there's far more than that because we also use the term when we play, we talk about playing music. We talk about playing soccer. So our exercise is a form of play often. We might play an actual game, which is what we actually have in our minds when we think play, but play is bigger than that. When we engage in play, we are calming our nervous system. We are going into a creative part of ourselves. We're going into a different way of thinking. Okay, so, and when we think about children now, that's the only operating system that's going on in their brain. When they're children, that frontal cortex, that operating system that is the problem solving and the way we do things as adults, that part isn't well wired yet. Sure, they might have a firing in there, a random fire that you're like, whoa, they figured that out. But it's not their main operating system. Play is part of your limbic system. It is part of your emotional center. It is connected deeply in all of that. So that's where our children live. And so if we can understand that that's where they live, then when we want to teach them and we want to handle problems with them and we want to correct them and lead them and challenge them and settle their fears, all of the things. And if we enter that kind of world with them and realize that they are continuously functioning there, then we can take them along the way much faster. You remember when you started this podcast, Casey, that like there's nerves. I know with my podcast too, I was like, oh, what am I doing? You know, like I was scared. And when I pushed the first go, I don't know what I expected, but I was like, is the house going to fall down? Like, what did I do? You know, like there's this fear, right? The first time you do something. And if we can respect that our children live there all day, every day, then we treat them a little bit differently. We change our expectations, I think, of them too. So, yeah, so that's kind of the concept of play. And so then when I think of the language we use around that, we want to be able to foster that understanding that we know how it is that they're functioning. We use language differently. Instead of saying, why'd you do that, as a correction, we start saying, why'd you do that? What were you thinking about? How did you feel when you did that? What happened next? And you go at it with curiosity, because that's where they're at. And you go at it with curiosity. And one of the examples that I really like to tell is this kiddo that I know. He was a 9 or so, 8, something like that at the time. And he was sitting in the gymnasium at the school. And he was just sitting along the wall waiting for the buses to come at the end of the day. And he was watching kids that were walking around. And he was noticing that the line that was painted on the floor in front of him, rarely did people step on. And he thought that was really interesting. So he puts his foot out there to see if somebody would step on his foot. What do you suppose it looked like to staff?
I guess like he was doing something wrong.
Like he's trying to trip people. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, because the kids are walking around, so he sticks his leg out when kids are coming. It looks like he's trying to trip people. And what ended up happening was that the staff came up to him and said, what are you doing? And they took him out, and he had some consequences for it. And don't try to trip people. He said, I wasn't. But everybody saw it. He was, right? That's what it looked like in our adult brain. That's what he was doing. And then I knew this child from, a context that wasn't just in school. I knew him from outside of school. I knew him quite well. And so I went to him and I asked him, what was it like? What were you doing? I know you. I know you weren't trying to trip people. And when I said that, he just perks right up. And I said, what were you doing? And that's when he explained to me all this thing about he was watching the kids and noticing that they weren't stepping on this line. And so he wanted to see if they'd step on his leg. Now, this kind of experiment inside of his brain is a perfect illustration of how our children's brains work. They don't have this reasoning like we have, that what happens if if I do this kind of behavior, what happens then? That's just simply not part of it. We've all heard the expression about our teenagers or even our college kids. They can't think past Friday. And with the younger they are, they can't think past this immediate experience. So when I talked with him about that, and then we went to the other teachers together and we explained he explained what he was doing. And then he asked me to help him out for a few people that he felt a little afraid, like he couldn't come up with the words. That was another learning thing for me too, because for some people that he needed to tell what was going on, he was too afraid to come up with the words, like he couldn't explain. So those emotions will shut down their words, which from the adult's perspective makes them look more guilty. But that wasn't what was going on at all. So rewind this incident back to our parenting. The way we can be more successful, the way we can be more healthy in our relationships with them, is to recognize and honor that their brains are just developing. They're just starting. And when we start anything like you and your podcast or me and my podcast, there's a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of forgotten pieces. There is an inability to see past what I'm doing at this moment because I'm learning, because I'm in that creativity zone, that curiosity. How does it work if I? And that doesn't have forethought when you're in this immediate, how does it work if I? And that's where kids are living. So if we can go there and then we change the way we talk to them, our language changes. The relationship will become so much better. What ends up happening is that you build connection. The child feels believed in. The child is empowered. It causes our kids even to be more honest because lies come when they're afraid.
Right.
But if they sense, like this kiddo with me, he knew I believed in him. I had known him from, various contexts. And so he knew that he was safe with me. And the other teachers he knew, but he only knew from a context of school. And in that particular context in school, he felt accused and it shut him down. So the way we approach our kids can change quite a bit when we understand how their brain is working.
So with all of that,
That was a lot. I know, that was a lot.
It was so much. You mentioned, though, one thing I do want to piggyback on is that, unfortunately, we were misraised in thinking that we're supposed to put fear into our children so that they obey us. The problem with that is if they feel like they've done something wrong, or something like, let's just say, molestation or abuse, or some adult comes to them with candy, says, "Would you like to blah, 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 blah," or something happens where they feel the need to tell. Unfortunately, the fear tells them not to, because they've gotten so used to the parents putting fear into them, they now don't feel comfortable talking to the parents. And so the thing is, we were raised that way, of yelling and screaming and beating, that we now think that's what we're supposed to do. Right. So how does an adult themselves begin to uncondition the way they were raised and recondition the proper way? Of course, obviously, first they have to admit it's not working. How do they, though, themselves begin to, as you said when we had our meeting before this, parent themselves first? Because until you're parented, you really can't apply this to your children. So were there any steps you took to undo what you were taught and put on the new, I'll say, garment of raising children that might help someone who realizes they really do need to change the way they parent?
Yeah, that is such a fantastic question, because you are spot on. When we have our baggage from childhood, and every one of us does, every one of us, no matter how good our parents were, there's stuff because they had stuff too. We're humans, so we have stuff. So once we admit, like you say, that we have stuff, then we become able to begin the process of changing what it is that we want to change. And then there's this process of figuring out, when I like identifying which behavior you want to change. So you mentioned yelling. Let's just go there. But every little nugget of our interaction, we kind of need to do this with in order to unpack it. So maybe one nugget is doubting your kid. One nugget is feeling triggered. I mean, there's so many things. But let's just take this idea of yelling. So then when and every one of us, I too, have yelled at my kids. And if I could do it differently, I would. They're adults now, but I don't yell at my grandkids. I understand them differently now. So when we look at our situation and we recognize, I just yelled at my kids, I don't want to be the parent that yells at their kids. And you pause and you hear yourself, ask yourself, why did I yell? The first thing that often comes up for us is because they, and it's not because they. It's never because they. If somebody is able to irritate us, it's because we are irritable. If somebody is able to trigger us, it's because we are in a state that we can be triggered. So we need to ask, what's going on inside of me that has caused me to be this irritable or triggerable or whatever it is? So why did I yell? And start it with, like when that happens, correct yourself. It's not because they, because I, and then stay there and sit with it for a while. Because I what? And maybe in that moment, we'll remember back to a situation where we did this same thing as our child and our parents yelled at us. And we'll, in that moment, in that flash of memory, we might say, oh, it's a learned parenting trait. That means I can unlearn it. I can change it. And in that moment, I want you to say, let's go one step deeper. How did I feel? And how did I respond when my parents yelled? And then you will know where your child is probably at. Now, I say probably on all these things because I'm taking a guess on, let's talk about yelling for you might be the memory of your parent. And maybe, like everybody's got a little different story. So certainly when you have this experience, you morph it to be how it matches. So in my case, that's what I'm telling. In my case, I remembered my mom and dad yelling at me for the same thing. And then my first reaction was because they, wait a second, nope, it can't ever be because they, because I what? And then how is it that I felt when I was a child and my parents did that to me? And I remembered feeling just like shaky inside. I remembered feeling like I can't speak. I remembered crying. I remembered like all of the things. And I remembered all those emotions. And when I thought, oh, that's what I just poured on my child, no wonder now they cannot do what I asked them to do. I did not empower them to do what I asked them to do. I poured on them fear. And fear doesn't empower. So when we want to change that, we have to step back again and then figure out, okay, so what did my little person need? What did little Dinalynn need? And so then I had a friend, Carolyn Garnett McGraw, who walked me through this. She wrote a book, You Don't Owe Anyone. She walked me through this process of how do you walk yourself back to be able to reparent yourself. And that's a process. But in a nutshell, you talk to that part of yourself, and out loud helps to be able to like separate, okay, here's the me now, here's the heart inside of me that I'm talking to. So like I kind of positioned myself differently. So I was kind of like talking, to work through it. And then it alleviated those feelings inside of me in a way that I was then able to come to my children differently. Does that answer your question, Phil?
It does, very much so. So before a parent, so once a parent resolves, they get healed. Before they begin to start now parenting the correct way, do you believe it's important for them to first apologize to their children? And if so, what are the benefits of doing so?
Oh my gosh. I think that concept of repair is probably one of the most important concepts entirely in our parenting, because our children forgive easily. Our children, they know only what they're seeing. And if we don't apologize, they learn that apology is a bad thing. Don't do it. If they see us apologize, they learn, oh, I can see how to change this situation that just happened. They know they make mistakes all day long. Nobody needs to tell them that. But we need to show them and give them the examples of how do you make a good apology? And then what are the feelings that come with that? And then to be able to reconnect so that that trust and that bond is reconnected. So how do you do it? To make a good repair, you need to first tell them plainly what I did. Now, you don't go saying, I yelled at you because you, That's not true. So we need to admit ourselves and not have it be one of these apologies that are like with a sting at the end. You know what I mean by that? Yeah.
Yeah.
How somebody apologizes to you, but it doesn't really feel like it's an apology because they only partly owned it. And I see that a lot with parents because many times we don't want to admit that this was all our stuff. And so the apology repair would sound something like, I'm sorry that I yelled at you, whatever it is. Um, can you forgive me? And maybe in that case, maybe that's all it was. And if you yelled at them and accused them and I mean, yelling at can mean so many different things. It can come with words that are really, really harsh, or it can be a short, quick, I don't know. But you ask for you ask for forgiveness. You state what it is that you did, and then you ask, how can I make it better? How can I make it right? Something of that nature, depending on the age of your child. Like if you have teens, you're going to go deeper. And they might even ask you, why did you yell at me? They might say, yeah, this is fine. And they might be mad at you. They might say, I'm not going to forgive you yet. And you need to be able to say, okay, I know that I hurt you. And when you're ready, I'm here for you. I know I did wrong. And dropping it with ownership that that's what I did, not making an excuse on it. And that's what's going to teach our children to own their own behaviors too. If we don't, they won't.
All right, thank you so much for that. Hello, everyone. We are back. My computer shut down, so I'm on a new computer, which is why there's a different background. And actually, can you hear me right now?
Mm-hmm, I can.
Yes, I don't even need these. All right. So we left off asking you just a 3-step, because as I said, you do have a podcast, and I do believe that if people are serious about getting the water, they should go get it themselves. There's those I'm saying you could take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And so anyone who's seriously about drinking this water can go to your podcast and listen to the episode so they can learn for themselves um, um, how to parent their children a better way so they have better results. And so with that said, I asked, is there just for now a 3-step plan that they can start? This won't be the finish. This is just the beginning of them first realizing, okay, I was wrong in what I did. I acknowledged I was raised incorrectly. I now apologize to my children. And one thing we didn't mention is make sure you forgive your parents because they just didn't know. So forgive your parents, apologize to your children. Now we're on the road to better parenting and a 3-step process to children, whether they're 5, 15, or 25 in reparenting.
Very good. So yes, you mentioned that idea of forgiving our parents, which is very healing for ourselves. It allows us to have more compassion for ourselves when we realize they were doing the best they could with the information that they knew at the time. And then when we start to carry down those behaviors into our parenting that we are doing and we don't want to do, we can more easily forgive ourselves for, oh, I was just automatically doing all I knew at the time. And then as we learn better, we can do better. And it's like that in every area of life, whether like we talked about earlier in the podcast here, or in your podcasting, you do better as you know better. And if you listen to my podcast too, I've got some pretty bad audio at the beginning, then the audio gets better. And then I learn how to do some different other things. And then that's bad. And then that gets better. And it's really how all of life is for us, isn't it? And so when we can pour some self-compassion on, it will also help us then to have compassion going forward for our kids in a different kind of way. So 3-step plan, certainly the make, repair, and to own that kind of the responsibility for yourself, for your words, for your actions, to know your boundaries. And then to reach out to your children with curiosity and gentleness. And then a third thing I will say is err on the side of believing in them. Like that's where that compassion piece comes in. If you're going to err on one side or the other, err on the side of they need to learn, not need to be corrected. They need to learn, because the behavior of your child really tells you what they don't yet know fully. A part of the goofy thing about language is in English, we have so many words that mean many different things. And our children, they will learn a word in this context, and then they know it in that context. And you change the word a little bit, and they don't know it in this context. Or you take the same word and you go to grandma's house, and they don't know it there because it's a different context. So we sometimes assume that they know and they need correcting. So I think that third piece, I want to say that compassion is remembering that they're learning and their behavior is an indicator to what you still need to teach. So yes, I will say that also go to my podcast. There's lots and lots and lots of information there on different aspects in nuggets of information all the way through. I think I've an episode 82 or so right about now, and as of this recording. And yeah, so there's lots of information there. And then I know that when I have parents come in for coaching, we look at three big main areas, which of course are teased apart. And that is knowing yourself and what's going on, knowing how the child's brain works so that we can talk to it in a way it understands. And the third thing is to change our language so that the connection is built at that deeper level. And then, of course, there's more, but that's a very simple summary. And each of those steps can be as in depth as you're willing to go. So yeah.
So then my next question, which I think you already answered it. So
okay,
do you only give out this information through podcasts, maybe books, or do you do one-on-one coaching with parents who may need more than just a podcast?
Oh, absolutely. At this point in time, I have an unpublished, just started kind of book, but it's nowhere near publishing yet. I have my podcast is the main vehicle that people can find me through. And then, yes, I help parents. Primarily, I market towards parents of children with speech and language delays because my background is speech pathology. That's why I've got the brain science background. However, what I find is that what we do with kiddos with speech and language delay, when we really understand how the brain operates, we start to parent differently. And it doesn't matter if your child has a language delay or not. It works. It's communication that works. So, yeah.
I guess that would be the, if you would find the root to all our problems, what would be communication. We don't really communicate, and only, I truly believe we're still stuck in the master-slave relationship where the slave doesn't get to communicate because you're just supposed to listen. And as we raise our children, that's the way we raise them. You don't get to have a say. You just shut up and you listen. And I believe that's also why there's divorce is so high in this country, because no one communicates. We make assumptions that someone should know instead of ask questions like, why did you do that? And ask it, as you said, in a tone of voice where it gives them a chance to speak and not be so fearful to answer the question. So again, so you said you have a podcast and you do one-on-one. Do you have a website where they can contact you for, is it remote? Is it in person? How does someone contact you if they believe they really do need one-on-one with you?
Sure. So, yes, I think that I want to comment too, when you comment on communication, underneath all that is connection. And the connection is only going to happen when there's true belief in one another. And so that will dispel that master-slave relationship, because listening itself is a skill. And when we have our children try to listen, but we haven't taught them that skill yet as a skill set, we have an expectation that's unrealistic. So anyway, how people get a hold of me is hello@thelanguageofplay.com. My website is yet unpublished also. It is thelanguageofplay.com. And yeah, so get a hold of me through hello@thelanguageofplay.com. And I do coaching. And you asked, I do it virtually. And I do it in person if you live near me. I also do speaking engagements, which I have really, really liked, because that allows an audience to ask questions. And so when I speak to groups of parents of toddlers, those seem to be the ones that are really saying, what's going on here? And they're at the beginning stages. And so that's like really, really cool. But still, I just spoke to a grandparent group just a couple months ago, and that was like super fun too. So relationship, communication, connection is under all of it. So yes. And so I do really enjoy the public speaking engagements. That's fun.
That is all the time we have for you today on Healthy and Wealthy Conversations. I would like to thank our guest, Dinalynn, for stopping on by. Thank you, the audience, for watching. Have a great day. If you liked this interview and would like to connect with Dinalynn, you can email her at hello@thelanguageofplay.com. If you would like to listen to her podcast, you can go to Apple Podcasts and search Dinalynn Rosenbush for The Language of Play, and her podcast will appear. If you would like to be added to Dinalynn's emailing list, email her at hello@thelanguageofplay.com, and she will add you to her emailing list. If you would like to connect with Dinalynn Rosenbush via her Facebook group, listen to her podcast for more information. Thank you for watching. So next question.
Yeah.
You do have a podcast, so I don't want you to, so for those who really care to change, they can listen to it. Is there, though, I guess you can say, maybe a 3-step process where they can start? So they've dealt with themselves, they've apologized. Now, how do they start raising their children correctly? And I guess, with that also said, what age do you think is too late, so to speak, to start up? Or should they maybe listen to the podcast with their children so they can understand that, mom, dad didn't understand this when I was raising you, blah, 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 blah. So what are some steps parents can start doing to fix their mistakes, whether the child is 5 or 15 or 25?
Sure. First off, I think we need to remember that there is no age that is too late when you're talking about relationship. Obviously, the depth of injury and the depth of repair will vary if there's been a very poor, like a bad assault kind of thing going on. That, like you mentioned, molestation or, abuse, significant. It's hard to repair those. However, it always can be made better, a little bit or a lot, by making that repair. So that is huge. Now, you asked many parts of that question to me. So in my mind, I'm actually going like this down the different avenues. And so I'm thinking to myself, which way do I go to answer that? I think I want to go down the avenue of is remembering first that your relationship matters and it is worthwhile. And then the other part of where you begin with yourself. And then another place with your child to begin is going to be to remember that they are the age they are. They have not come to this life knowing stuff. They have come and ready to learn, but they don't know all their stuff yet. Neither do we. But they're counting on us to show them how some of this life is lived. So let's get curious. Let's go at them with language that explores what it is that they're thinking and explores what it is that they are wanting and how they're feeling.
If you would like to invite Dinalynn Rosenbush to a podcast, webinar, or to speak at your next event on The Language of Play, you can email her at hello@thelanguageofplay.com.